LGB. 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 LGB.
They say LGB everywhere I go. LGB. What it means, I don't know. LGB. Whatever it is. LGB. Kamala, help me, please. Please.
Alrighty then.
Thank you. LGB.
That's let's go, Brandon. Right?
LGB.
This means let's go, Brandon.
No. LGB.
Sounds like let's go, Brandon. I guess.
LGB. All right. Let's go, Brandon.
I am Cornholio.
Chant LGB. Right wing and left wing. LGB. Go, you know the thing. LGB. If you don't sing that back. LGB. And you ain't black. LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB.
Let's go, Brandon.
LGB. Let's go, Brandon.
FJB. Let's go, Brandon.
I'm Joe Biden, and I forgot this.
Greetings, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Reading Epic Threads. I'm your host, Patrick Gunnels, joining you from Houston, Texas, this April 8th, 2024 at 9:20 a.m. Central Daylight Time. And today we are going to have a total eclipse of the sun. And my wife does not give a shit. I think that it will be used as an excuse for something freaky to happen. So I am keeping my fingers crossed that everything stays well. By the time you see this, the eclipse will have already happened, because I try to get this show to upload 3 p.m. Central Daylight Time, but sometimes I just screw up and forget to set the settings right. I'm not a details guy, you see. Guys, I want you to go to epicminerals.net. As of right now, our actual inventory is down to like 12 bottles left. It's not a big deal because we've got more on the way, but there's a tiny, tiny disruption coming. So if your supply is low already, which is possible, go to epicminerals.net and use promo code Shapiro to pry $1 from my grasping hands. Today, I'm going to present the Kate Awakening, who does a Substack article once, it feels like once every eclipse, but when she writes, it's always brilliant. So let's go ahead and get started. From thekateawakening.substack.com, philosophy. In recent years, we've witnessed a significant shift in the collective consciousness, as people from all walks of life are beginning to question the status quo and search for deeper meaning in their lives. This phenomenon, often referred to as the Great Awakening, has seen individuals from all corners of the world seeking out the truth and challenging accepted narratives that have long dictated our thoughts and actions. However, despite the growing number of people embarking on this quest for knowledge, many still find themselves feeling unfulfilled, disconnected, and unhappy. It appears that in our pursuit of truth and happiness, we have become reliant on external circumstances to provide us with a sense of purpose and contentment. In doing so, we've lost sight of the ancient wisdom and philosophies that once guided humanity toward a more balanced and fulfilling existence. You should see this period as one of the most inspiring and hopeful times in human history. You'd expect to see people filled with joy and exhilaration, but that's not what I'm seeing. The collective mood appears to be anguish, dissatisfaction, apprehension, impatience, as most everyone seems to be waiting for something, waiting for signs that we're winning, waiting actually to see some truth on the nightly news, waiting for the justice phase, for Trump to come back, for Jesus to come back, waiting to die so they get their reward for suffering, just waiting. It reminds me of The Waiting Place by Dr. Seuss. Waiting for a train to go, or a bus to come, or a plane to go, or the mail to come, or the rain to go, or the phone to ring, or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting. waiting for the fish to bite, or waiting for wind to fly a kite, or waiting around for Friday night, or waiting perhaps for their Uncle Jake, or a pot to boil, or a better break, or a string of pearls, or a pair of pants, or a wig with curls, or another chance. Everyone is just waiting. I see people hyper-focused on external circumstances to inform them when it's time to be happy again, and they wait. It's not to say everyone is sitting around twiddling their thumbs. On the contrary, I see many people striving to move the needle on these societal concerns we all know need changing. These efforts are indeed essential in our pursuit of a better world. But still, something is missing. I decided to do a little introspection to see if I had any of the anguish I was seeing in other people, in hopes I might be able to figure out what this elusive missing piece may be. Instead, I found that I felt surprisingly happy. What the fuck? How? In the 6 years I've put myself out there in this movement, I feel like I've been put through a meat grinder. I won't go into all of it, but some of you who have followed me may have seen at least some of the public stuff, while entire groups of people went digging through my past and the private lives of my family members to find any dirt they could on me. It was like being a contestant on This Is Your Life, only it's almost entirely made up to make you look like an asshole. And the show host is Satan. Despite moments of feeling conscious and paralyzed, while a sluggish, flesh-eating disease devours me from the toes up, I remain optimistic. How is that? I think it's because my focus has shifted from trying to change the world to trying to change the world through changing myself. I'm led by a philosophy that the key to fulfillment lies not in the external circumstances that we often focus on, but rather in the development and cultivation of our character. I believe we are all here to push heroically through our own human revolution, transforming each one of our lives at the deepest level. And our mission is to leave this world a better person than when we came into it. I can't tell you the peace it brings me to be guided toward a mission to be the very best person I can be, rather than constantly fighting to change my every circumstance. And it's made me feel a whole lot sturdier. I realize the thing that might be missing from people's lives is a strong philosophy of living that makes them feel empowered and unshakably happy no matter their plight. For human beings to live lives of fulfillment, it is absolutely vital to have a philosophy that reveals the wonder, dignity, and infinite potential of life. Every person is an irreplaceable, precious existence, and happiness comes from understanding that fact and living accordingly. Philosophy not only informs us of the nature of life, it has the power to transform our way of thinking and living. We need philosophies that offer tangible guidance, fostering self-awareness and personal growth, causing us to better ourselves and strive to reach our full potential. That's where true, unshakable happiness comes from. What I'm seeing is anything but unshakable. Everything appears to hinge on what's going on in the outside world. In an era where every bit of information is literally at our fingertips, we've all but lost our connection to any real meaning. Probably nowhere is it more obvious than with our youth. Young people should be passionate and idealistic, happy and hopeful, but today's youth have almost no ideals at all. Materialism, consumerism, the abuse of every kind of comfort and pleasure has borne disillusionment, cynicism, and apathy, the denial of spirituality, a proud disdain for anything supranatural, and an absence of faith in a higher order of things or a true, deeper meaning have, ironically, left people with a feeling of floating out in space with nothing to anchor them into their life on Earth. While worthwhile causes can provide a sense of fulfillment, many individuals still find themselves caught in a perpetual cycle of anticipation, waiting for these external factors to bring them happiness. And it's a terrible shame, because life is immeasurably precious. I'm even a bit concerned about what will happen when we win and people achieve temporary happiness, but realize once again that something is still missing. True happiness can come only from within, not from circumstance. If your circumstances dictate your happiness, then it isn't genuine happiness, nor is it steadfast, and it will inevitably be shaken. I believe this world was made hard intentionally, and that we are here to be challenged in order for us to grow and develop our human spirit. We'll never stop the cycle of problems and hardships arising in our lives, even when we experience occasional victories. The big win never lasts. While it is indeed important to concern ourselves at times with the well-being of society, we should keep in mind that a flourishing civilization is made up of strong, happy individuals. By changing ourselves, we also change the world around us. It is impossible for a living thing to change without also affecting his environment. Throughout history, the strongest societies were the ones where philosophy played a central role in shaping the intellectual and cultural landscape. Ancient civilizations like Greece, India, and China developed rich philosophical traditions that explored fundamental questions about the nature of reality and life in general, and these concepts were deeply intertwined with everyday life, religion, and governance. Philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle ignited humanity with profound inquiries into ethics, metaphysics, and politics. It was through lighting that spark of deeper meaning in individuals that uplifted entire cultures. It wasn't just about believing, it was about implementing these principles into daily life, philosophical praxis that invigorated the lives of people and mankind collectively. Having a strong philosophy is what gives life dignity, meaning, and worth, and those are the values that you can draw upon when things get hard. Philosophy should be a beacon for people in darkness, a guide in confusion, and a lifeline to cling to in danger. As I said earlier, I do think life is difficult by design, but not because we're being punished. Rather, it's a means for growth and self-improvement. The hardships we encounter are opportunities to test our mettle, examine ourselves with unflinching honesty, and strive towards our full potential. It is only by embracing this journey and living up to our capabilities that we can truly attain lasting happiness. If happiness is dependent on our circumstances, we get stuck on the never-ending seesaw between joy and sorrow. A firm philosophy that causes us to live with honor and dignity is not only how we form unwavering happiness in our lives, I believe it is the absolute goal of human existence. In the end, it's how you handle yourself in this life that matters. If you think about it, it's really the only thing you can take with you. Most people find that in day-to-day life, it's not so hard to be a good person and do the right thing, but where will your beliefs be when the chips are down? If faced with the worst circumstance you could imagine, will you have a solid foundation to stand on, or will you feel like you're flailing? Will you find strength and fortitude, or will you crumble and wait for something or someone to save you? The way that a man handles himself in times of suffering is the true measure of whether his philosophy has failed him or not. Can he remain brave, dignified, and unselfish when faced with suffering? Or in his bitter fight for self-preservation, will he forget his humanity and act more like an animal? These days, for many individuals, their religious beliefs serve as the primary source of their deeply held philosophy. In tandem with the Great Awakening, religious fervor seems to be on the rise. Despite that, however, I'm not seeing any great easing of suffering or profound strength or happiness being exemplified. Many seem to be stuck in a sort of spiritual quicksand, more consumed and dragged under by their beliefs than propelled forward. And I'm still witnessing people focused on external circumstances to dictate their happiness or fulfillment. I want more for my fellow man. In these tumultuous times, many find solace in the widely used expression, God wins, to soothe them into knowing that in the end, everything is going to be okay. God wins, and as long as you aren't a wretched person, you are on God's team. Yeah, well, no shit, God wins. It's God who's going to beat him. I'd like to use a basketball analogy here because those of you who know me know how very well versed I am in all types of sports ball. If you're playing basketball and your team wins, technically you win too. But what if you sat on the bench for most of the game? And what if in the 3 minutes you actually played, you accidentally scored a point for the other team, tripped over your shoelaces, and hit the ground so hard you puked up orange Gatorade in front of everyone? Will the win of your team feel as sweet? I have a feeling that God wants us to play well and diligently pursue our full potential, even if our team is going to win no matter what. If one's adherence to religion makes him wait death passively so they can be rewarded for all the suffering they endured, honestly, what's the point? It's not a dog religion. If your religion gives you the strength and conviction it takes to continuously improve yourself, and also the courage it takes to be happy and dignified no matter what your circumstance, then that is awesome and totally valuable, in my opinion. This is all just about examining our beliefs with absolute honesty to see how those beliefs impact our lives. Religion is supposed to help us through life, but we have to do it right. Unfortunately, many organized religions keep people in a childlike state without the ability to think for themselves, controls them through fear, causes them to wait for something or someone to save them. It fosters dependency rather than empowerment. The expectation to accept doctrines without critical examination leaves individuals bereft of genuine understanding, their autonomy, independent thought, and instinct subdued under the weight of dogma. It's no wonder many people feel empty, conflicted, and tense. We need to be able to think critically and use discernment to implement our philosophy effectively. Challenging our beliefs is really what makes them take root and become a strength for us rather than an attachment. There are people who will fervently announce they won't watch some of our shows on Badlands because the topics are outside of their currently held beliefs. If you ever find yourself thinking, I refuse to entertain ideas that I don't already believe, I implore you to break that chain in your mind. No truth will ever be threatened by rigorous scrutiny or challenge. If something is the truth, it will emerge victorious, no matter how many times you put it to the test. In the end, you have to find what resonates with you and what works in your life. I believe it comes down to finding what provides you with dignity, meaning, purpose, and unshakable happiness. Simply put, does your religion or philosophical framework really make your life better? The happiness I'm talking about is not mere fleeting emotions of pleasure, but the pursuit of true fulfillment and the peace and contentment that can only be achieved through being the best version of yourself. The enduring wisdom and prescience displayed by the Founding Fathers in their drafting of the Constitution comes to mind. I firmly believe they demonstrated profound insight in declaring our inalienable rights, such as the pursuit of happiness, and acknowledging the importance of a higher power while not attaching it to a particular set of religious beliefs or doctrines. The inclusion of God in the framing of our country wasn't about religion. It underscored, rather, the intrinsic value of man. Our forefathers understood that a strong and lasting society could not be built on anything other than a deeply profound reverence for man, the inherent worth of human beings, and their inalienable rights could come from nothing less than a higher, transcendent power. Society exists for man, not the other way around. This concept stood in contrast to the systems they were rebelling against that prioritized the interests of the state or the ruling elites over the importance of individuals. Respecting the value of each person is essential for fostering a society that promotes human flourishing, fulfillment, and happiness. The dignity of man is sourced in the divine. This dignity of human life is what I'd like to see us return to in the population of awakened people, a population that is growing exponentially. I'm inspired to see the fostering of critical thinking and the willingness to share and challenge ideas openly and honestly, as these things are integral to discovery. However, I am concerned about the obstacles some face in examining their own personal philosophies, which should serve as a foundation for enriching lives, fostering personal growth, and providing strength in these turbulent and uncertain times. We have undoubtedly uncovered the divisive tactics of those in power who seek to pit us against each other in every way. They want us to spend our time arguing against each other with closed minds, rather than working together to improve our lives. I'd really like to see the dialogue open up about the deeper meaning of the human experience and what we're all collectively going through, igniting a new level of awakening that brings peace and joy to all people. All right, that is the kateawakening.substack.com. Food for thought, guys. I'd love to hear what you think about this piece myself. We all have diverging opinions on things like religion, because we know we're a religiously heterogeneous group. I'm always interested to hear what your thoughts are on this stuff. I tend to sympathize with this way of thinking, personally. That's just me, though. All right. We have another piece that we're going to do, and that is going to be The Great Burning Bright. From burningbright.substack.com, The Whole Temple, Forging Light Along the Darkest Path by Burning Bright. What sparked your awakening? To the sleepers among us, those who occupy what I often refer to as the normie layers of the collective mind, that question strikes me as some mix of esoteric, amorphous, and even disturbing in its psychospiritual implications. And yet, I would venture to guess that every single pair of eyes and the burning minds behind them, reading these words, didn't find themselves struck by the paralysis of non-answer, but rather its opposite. For us, the awakening, but never fully awakened diggers and delvers in the deep and dark, the question is less off-putting and off-balancing and more focusing, directing, and guiding. If there is any paralysis inherent in the rumination on this question for us, then it is more likely to be the result of the kaleidoscopic cascade of potential answers it calls up than the opposite, each more steadying than the last. For, as I have argued many times in these digital pages, on the path to awakening, questions are often more important than answers, as being able to forge a cognitive spiritual mindset to looking beyond the veil and shattering the collective spell the collectivists have laid over us is itself the key skill set and mentality that separates the anon and the awakened from those still trapped in the liar's sleep. I have spoken at length on my podcast appearances about the fact that the 9/11 conspiracy was my gateway into the truth community, even if we didn't call it that at the time. I was too young during the events of that day to do more than gawk as the paradigm that had been carefully erected around one generation gave way to a new, faux patriotic one designed to goose-step us into a series of forever wars in the Middle East. But in my teenage years, the combination of a Northeast upbringing under Union Democrat parents, a fascination with the legacy of John F. Kennedy, and a revulsion at all things Bush-era Republican, the jingoist veneer laid over true patriotism with full intention by the powers that would be, caused me to re-examine the key historical, cultural, political, military shatterpoint of the modern age. And yet my digging in the dark in those years didn't lead me to any sort of light, any sort of signal within the noise, except to let me know that the Republicans I had long been told by liberal friends and family were in fact evil, while the other side, the same side, Democrats, represented by the Clinton, Obama, and Biden regimes, was left in a position not quite of hero worship in my mind, but at least seeming opposition to this evil. How ironic. And so, my own journey to awakening needed two wake-ups, two shatter points. as the obvious and unmistakable corruption of the Obama era destroyed any remnants of belief I had in the organic, honest duality and opposition in U.S. and world politics. I withdrew from socio-political analysis on a personal level and devoted myself to two pursuits: professional fighting and professional writing, the former of which I actually credit more with my eventual increase in discernment than the latter, even if the latter paid more bills and brought you folks to these pages in one form or another. My second path, my true path to awakening, then, is one I eventually dubbed the darkest path, and it's one that needs no explanation to this community, whether that pathway is first illuminated for you with the Clintons and Haiti, or the Podesta emails that kicked off the most illusion-shattering and paradigm-shifting conspiracy of them all. It is a pathway paved by the blood of innocence, and whether you use the Pizzagate label, Epstein Island, or any other number of revealed and to-be-revealed symbols of it, the pathway itself is the underlying foundational reality that the system of systems was built on, and whose absolute necessity of secrecy held closed the gates of evil until such a time as humanity is ready to pry them open. And pry we have. And so, as we revisit, and not for the last time, the darkest path in the InfoWar, we do so not just with the calling to light, but with the backing of it. As the first question I opened this piece with can be reformed and reframed into one that seems more poignant and essential to ask ourselves these days. What sparked your awakening, then, is of far less importance to consider than the following. Why are you still here? Not in the corporeal sense, of course. Why are you still here in the awakening, in the active, cognizant, and cognitively intentional digging and delving when so much has already been unearthed, and at great cost, personal, professional, and perhaps especially spiritual, to the diggers, to the forgers in darkness, to you, to us? Through all the ups and downs, from the actual to the narrative, and most importantly, the mass psychological, through all the ops going every which way, the chaos that your sleeping friends and family willfully or tacitly ignore at the peril of their own souls, the psycho-spiritual pain and the cognitive strain, not to mention the ongoing social strife, you stand. Why? Because you believe in something, and that belief has driven you and continues to drive you into the very darkness you seek to burn away. Because you have answered the first call that is the last call. Because, as I have argued time and again, it was always about the children, and it always will be. And no matter how many warring narratives we have and will continue to parse and track in the intentionally winding ways of the InfoWar, from the political and clandestine to the financial and cultural, those of us in this community understand which stories are most important for the long haul and which carry the spark of light that doesn't just chase away the darkness such stories are shrouded in, but is defined by it. And there have been narratives of late, each story seeming to be the most seismic one since the last one, and each providing the potential for micro shatterpoints within the larger macro that is the collective mind we have each been enslaved by, and that we each and all seek to free, so that we might be free in every sense of the word, not just in the realm of the mind, but in the realm of the real. From Baltimore to Moscow, Israel to Afghanistan, we've been told that the news is fake, but the war is real. And while your mileage may vary in terms of just how literally you take that particular refrain, replacing the word news with stories will avail you well in terms not so much of parsing what is going on, but more on what the mind movers on both sides of the game board want you to believe is going on, so that you might react and act in accordance with their wishes. And that narrative intent gives the game away before we've started playing. Your mind is the pathway to your own salvation, and you must guard it in the midst of a mind war, as I argued at length in All the World's a Stage. Thus, I have long maintained that questioning actuals doesn't always imply questioning their reality, but rather their persuasion. Just as narratives can and do provoke actuals, hence my obsession with them, actuals are typically accompanied by conflicting narratives. Thus, it's important to examine the net effects and to attempt to suss out the narrative intent of those telling the stories. If we apply this cognitive cipher to the recent Baltimore Bridge deployment, whether we take General Flynn's Black Swan commentary or John Harold's ability to draw not-so-coincidental lines between newly added CISA-bound executive orders relating to U.S. national security, specifically of the cyber variety, where it concerns ports of entry, to my own more controversial leaning that the long-term actuals that could result in the continued exposure of the folly of running a 2024 nation on World War II-era infrastructure lies, in keeping with the mass psychological exposure of operation that orbits the switch theory I've written about extensively around these parts, the fact remains that the collective mind is far more willing and able to engage in more asymmetric and therefore paradigm-altering analysis of such events, further distancing them from total control of the central narrative. Just as the Baltimore Bridge incident has placed the collective sovereign eye of Sauron on both the agencies involved with U.S. infrastructure development, planning, and security, and those responsible for holding them to account, the Moscow theater deployment has surfaced everything from proxy terrorism to clandestine shadow wars, oddly and presciently in keeping with the narrative deployments of one Vladimir Putin, whom I did my most expansive deep dive into yet in last month's Righteous Russia retrospective, The Reckoning Real. The story is the war, which means it's of far less importance what happens according to the central narrative, and of far greater importance what storytellers the world over claimed happened and why. When we apply this actual narrative refrain to the darkest path in the info war, for example, whether or not Baltimore was an engineered black swan in an election year, the narrative that it could have been is seismic, which is to say nothing of the alleged Ukrainian shipmaster, just as the timing in the wake of the mass mimetic event of the P. Diddy deployment is worth noting. Convergence abounds and accelerates in more ways than we could have imagined, which is why alleging that everything is fake and fine, as I have before, is less literal and more a gamified reversal of the Hegelian dialectic hall of mirrors the enemy has trapped the collective mind in for generations, which is all a rather asymmetric path to saying it's of far less importance that Diddy did flee to a Caribbean island in the wake of federal raids on his compound, and much more important that the story that he might have spread far and wide, providing more narrative convergence with the Epstein of it all, ground zero of the seeding phase in the collective mind, only if we leave the Clinton and Haiti shatterpoints to the side, which I am not wont to do. Unless, of course, you think all this line drawing is more symptomatic of an overactive mind prone to paranoia than emblematic of one given to macro pattern recognition. If so, please reconcile the resurfacing of Prince Andrew, or was it Prince Harry, in relation to the latest billionaire celebrity trafficking scandal involving the strategic and intentional filming and hoarding of compromising material on the world's most influential personalities. And so, it is not so important to me exactly what form the latest story of trafficking amongst world elites takes, as it is steadying and encouraging to see the shark fin template continue to map onto the war of stories in keeping with the foundational supposition I hold and apply to the info war and the mind war it's fighting to win. That being that the most important narratives resurface at auspicious and conspicuous times in order to continue the germination phase of the awakening ahead of the harvest to come, which will resemble a crisis cascade for those whose sins are dyed in more shades of red than we have eyes to see or minds to grasp. applying this framework as far back as the White House Correspondents' Dinner, in which Donald Trump infamously made references to the Haitian villages one Hillary Clinton stole, in a manner of speaking, the true scope and breadth not just of the enemy's corruption comes into view, but also that of the military intelligence operation launched to take it down, and which has been built on the back of the most powerful and effective military-civilian alliance ever forged. But then, you didn't think Haiti being back in the story was a coincidence too, did you? Seeding, germination, harvest. This is how a mind war is fought and ultimately how it is won. That harvest for them was fear, coding on the back of engineered Hegelian response. For us, it will be mandate for wholesale change, which is to say justice, another thing we've been told is coming. The shark fin template posits that the germination phase is more a gestation phase, which is why it is necessarily the longest in duration. The seeds of awakening must be watered by the seeming reality of it all, or the stories, the normie layers of the collective mind, have been told about their reality, from Epstein and Maxwell to Raniere and Nexium, Nygaard and Victoria's Secret to the Balenciaga saga, and now to P. Diddy and his diddling ways. The stories that are most mimetic also carry the dark nugget of a buried truth at their core. The collective mind is being prepped to believe it has unearthed all on its own. This unearthing will only commence in full when the why of it all is understood, as the most important step is always the last one, the one that clicks the rest of the puzzle into place. The darkest path is that why for them, just as it represents the ultimate and opposite why for many of us, certainly for me. As we ruminate on that original question, what sparked your awakening, sometimes we have to go to the beginning to see the end. And the beginning for many of us was the advent of the Q-Op, which I wrote about in my most popular feature to date, We Are Q. Link in the article. The foundation of the awakening, first hinted at to so many of us in those drops, is also the foundation of their subversive dark empire. And try, as the wielders of the false narrative that buoys the false reality, might conflate Pizzagate with the satanic panic of the 1980s. It's a lot more difficult to put that genie back in the bottle when the ones rubbing the lamp, when the ones telling the stories are themselves being implicated in the very crimes their layered narratives would weave a web of obfuscation on behalf of. From Princeton professors to media members themselves, a cursory examination of the revelations that continue to spill out of the red-crusted and blood-stained sieve meant to cover up the crimes against children of it all begins to lay the dark tapestry bare. Some of the wiser members of the establishment Defense League, masquerading as an independent media, have taken the opportunity to pile on to the Epstein narrative rather than running from it, but their retroactive #MeToo baiting will be entered into the annals of the remembered and perceived histories of the collective mind's staggered awakening as the smokescreen it was. Headline: Epstein had a creepy panopticon room to monitor all his guests. But who has the tapes? A new lawsuit against the sex trafficker's lawyer and accountant claims that guards constantly monitored guests at his New York mansion from a closed-circuit TV control center. Kate Bricolet, senior reporter, updated February 21st, 2024. Published February 21st, 2024. For every instance in which that name, those 7 letters, Epstein, are called up in a headline across the War of Stories battlescape, the truth continues to leak until it gushes. From the naming of the clients in January this year to the resurfacing lawsuits against central banks orbiting the whole clandestine, demonic operation, the depths of Epstein's depravity seem only to be exceeded by the ubiquity with which the empire he worked for has infiltrated every aspect of the system of systems we are destined to tear down one brick at a time, one revelation at a time. And whether Epstein goes by that name in the central narrative, or by Diddy, or Nygaard, or Podesta, or any of the seismic names to come. The dark names continue to resurface in staggered opposition to the bright ones that stand in opposition to them, from Donald Trump to Seth Rich, each acting as a cipher or seed, especially when held up to a mirror. And so, whether you're talking about the dark names or the bright ones, only one side on the game board is happy to see them occupying the headlines they are throughout 2023 to 2024. We can see that both the shark fin template and narrative convergence abound when it comes to some of the key foundational mysteries that provoked the Great Awakening in the first place, back before and during the advent of the Q-op. No doubt the Seth Rich murder, and the most infamous of the conspicuous number of laptops that litter the mindscape, each a very literal narrative vehicle for disclosure, is itself one of the most infamous conspiracies in the truth community, as just days before it was revealed that the FBI could be compelled to release that laptop's contents, we hope, some of the storylines and character ciphers most intimately tied to the original Rich narratives resurfaced, from Eric Prince of Blackwater fame to the Pizzagate controversy, Julian Assange, and the WikiLeaks bombshells from 2016. While it's impossible to know how many of the rumors surrounding Rich and the various laptops that are ubiquitous with corruption conspiracies in the info war hold water until we get the source, I can say with confidence that one side is quaking in their boots, ruminating on that very thing, and it ain't us. Perhaps the deployment that truly put the fear in the establishment, as indicated by the narrative death blossom that preceded it, was the aforementioned client name list dropped in January, kicking off the persuasion of the 2024 war of stories with 2017 aplomb. At the time, I issued the following sober warning to Anon minds hungry for the vengeance the most innocent among us are owed before this war is over. Quote, Fox, CNN, and the entirety of Con Inc. are blasting the Epstein Doe's story from the rooftops, and we're even seeing all the traditional hallmarks of a limited hangout with timing delays, obfuscation, etc. It's entirely possible that we're going to get some major actuals to come out of the latest Epstein deployment, but my gut read on this situation is that we're nearing the end stage of Overton's goalpost regarding the whole saga, in which the establishment attempts to conflate victims and targets with perpetrators. There's a reason some of the most suspect names in the alt media have been trying to tie Trump and Kennedy to Epstein of late. Either way, their attempts to cover up the true dregs of their dark empire will fail, and any tacit admission they make regarding the most elite pedo ring in the world can only bring us closer to their eventual exposure and absolution in the public mind. Exposure, disclosure, justice. It isn't clean, it isn't predictable, but it is inevitable. End quote. And while I wouldn't claim that it was the most difficult prediction to make, if you've been paying attention to the patterned rollout of revelation in the info war, it proved to be apt, with even supposed stalwart defenders of conservatism in the U.S. media piling on the Trump conflation bandwagon, kicking off Overton's goalpost in earnest. New York Post on Twitter, Jeffrey Epstein list, live updates, everything we know so far. While it can be a little frustrating to weather the Trump-Epstein conflation and obfuscation techniques blasted out by the media industrial complex, including right-wing media, when you zoom out a bit and consider it all through the twin lenses of a mass disclosure operation and the Great Awakening, it couldn't be going any better. For starters, as many have pointed out, the MAGA and Trump base already knows he's innocent of any criminal association with Epstein, though he was a clear target of the influence op. Second, the targets of the disclosure op are both the reachable center and left of American society, and what better way to get them engaged in the pre-narrative than with seeding that Trump could finally be taken down through his own alleged association with Epstein. In their blindness to see Trump toppled in the public mind, they have eagerly shifted the Overton window into the mass acknowledgement that Bill Clinton, a former president, associated with pedophiles at the very least. You can map this narrative retreat using the aforementioned Overton's goalpost cipher, which describes a narrative process in which the establishment rapidly attempts to reverse its own programming on the collective mind by following a series of predictable and ultimately futile disguised retreats along previously held psychological territory. When applied to the Trumpstein deployment, see what he did there, the cipher takes on the following form: deny, elite pedophile rings don't exist; diminish, the ubiquity of elite pedophile rings has been largely overstated; qualify, most elite pedophile rings have been dealt with; distract, Trump is the real elite pedophile; admit. That stage is pending. Until now, this process had yet to kick off in earnest with regards to the most damaging to them and unifying to us subject in The Awakening, as deploying it introduces a massive risk profile to the core pillars of the deep state's system of systems. The fact that the public about face has begun is both sobering and gratifying to longtime Anons, and represents only the beginning stages of coming revelations to the sleepers. That's a win, folks, and should help steady you when other more advanced obfuscation techniques come to the fore, which I have speculated on with the rising ubiquity of AI and the requisite doom-mongering that has come along with it.
All right, so this is simultaneously really impressive and really frightening at the same time, and it's hit me in ways that I didn't really expect. So do you remember Will Smith eating spaghetti? Do you remember when this was what AI-generated videos look like? Remember when we said, okay, this AI stuff is cool and all, but clearly there's a long way to go before there's any need for concern? Well, welcome to the future, people, because this is also an AI-generated video. And so is this, completely synthesized out of thin air by computers. This one too, this is not real. Absolutely ridiculous how far we've come in literally 1 year. This does feel like another ChatGPT, DALL-E moment for AI. And maybe I'm overreacting because, okay, I'm a video creator. So an AI that's actually doing my job, maybe that feels a little more threatening. So I'm particularly impressed by it. But also this stuff is really good. So today, Sam Altman and OpenAI announced a new model called Sora. And it can generate full up to 1 minute video clips from just text input. So the same way DALL-E was able to understand our text input and turn it into a photorealistic or stylized image or whatever you want, same thing with Sora. But now since it's videos, it also needs to understand how all these things like reflections and textures and materials and physics all interact with each other over time to make a reasonable looking video. And of course, right away, there's a bunch of examples on their website that are crazy. Now, before I show you these, I just need you to keep this in mind. You're about to watch a bunch of AI generated videos, and you know that you're about to watch a bunch of AI generated content. So your brain, you're already looking for this stuff, and it's not perfect. You will find imperfections, but not everybody who sees AI generated content on the internet knows to be looking for that. So also keep that in mind. This is also the worst that this technology is going to be from here on out. So, okay, here's one of the videos. There's no audio to any of these clips, but the prompt for this one is a stylish woman walks down a Tokyo street filled with warm, glowing neon and animated city signage. She wears a black leather jacket, a long red dress, and black boots. This video is already miles ahead of where we were. It has accurate lighting, it has materials, it has skin tones, movements, even has reflections all over the place. Now, of course, if you look at it for more than about 10 seconds very closely, there are lots of giveaways. Like this dude in the background kind of looks like he's gliding in a weird way. The frame rates and the reflections in the water are for some reason lower than the rest of the video. The camera movement overall is just a bit inconsistent, and it just, I don't know, it just kind of feels a little bit off. But then again, this is where we were 1 year ago. So just keep that in the back of your head for all this. Okay, how about this one? This is another one which has a long prompt about a camera following behind a white vintage SUV with a black roof rack as it speeds up a steep dirt road. This is also, again, really good. It kind of looks a little more video gamey because of how rock solid the drone footage is, but clearly very usable. Here's another one. A litter of golden retriever puppies playing in the snow. Their heads pop in and out of the snow covered in it. It's so good. It feels like the physics of the fur and the ears and everything with the snow flying around in slow motion.
I'm going to stop reading. I'm going to stop playing it there because I don't want to get busted for lack of fair use. Let's continue with Burning Bright. To the techie crowd, this video by YouTube phenom Marques Brownlee. I've only heard of Marcus Brownlee from his test drive of the Rimac Nevera, and yeah, he's awesome. Triggers the Soy Jack meme as they look forward to a future in which computers do everything for them. For the Anon crowd, particularly Q followers, the Sora AI video generation software doesn't so much resemble the creation of new, highly advanced tech, but rather the strategic rollout of plausible deniability for videos that could be surfacing in the coming months and years from prominent names that featured heavily in the original drops. Could be nothing. Could be something, trying an awful lot to look like nothing. Either way, as amazing as AI generation gets and as fascinating as I find algorithms to be, I've worked on them during my career, there will never be a full substitute for the real creation, real expression, real truth, real crimes. You see, the thing is, this is a zero-sum game, as evidenced by even the techie media getting involved in the accidental disclosure of the very system that holds aloft their illusion of expertise and elitism. Jeffrey Epstein's island visitors exposed by Data Broker. A Wired investigation uncovered coordinates collected by a controversial data broker that reveals sensitive information about visitors to an island once owned by Epstein, the notorious sex offender. End quote. Epsteinian headlines can be frustrated for long-time truthers, especially those who came up in the info war during the advent of the Q-op, as they can seem like recycled headlines presenting well-known information to us, as if it's seismic. When you observe such deployments under the twin framing of the war of stories and the shark fin template, where key vectors of awakening resurface and at auspicious times to forward the side of truth in the mind war, things get much more comfy. For example, it's not the fact that this headline exists that makes it important, but where it's coming from. Wired is one of the more trendy of the establishment rags, and their presentation of fresh Epstein info is not only hitting an audience adjacent to MSM programming, but doing so with a data-driven approach. The fact that elites were on Pedo Island isn't shocking. What could be shocking to normies is just how many and how frequent their trips. And it comes just a week after Diddy. Planned. So while frustrating and reprehensible, these headlines represent the work of a finite player. In other words, it's ammunition spent, never to be recovered, and further converges the Epstein narrative and all its implications into the bedrock of the American, perhaps the global, mind. Either way, all of this attempted reverse seeding and obfuscation was done before the actuals that did surface to kick off the year, namely the preponderance not just of names associated with Epstein's criminal enterprise, but titles. Patel Patriot on Twitter. Epstein was trafficking underage girls to foreign presidents. This is how you control them. More recently, the twin revelations to normies that came as no surprise to longtime truthers involved, the exposure of the hip-hop elite and those given to programming American children as to the basics of the encouraged debauchery of the party of false decorum. Hat tip Chris Paul. From the Daily Mail headline, exclusive, Nickelodeon was, quote, infiltrated by predators, records reveal. Channel employed 5 convicted child molesters and 2 other accused pedophiles to work on set of kids' shows. When you combine Overton's goalpost with the twin concepts of the shark fin template and accelerationism, the picture being painted doesn't look great from the perspective of those who would seek to keep things from the light. Specifically, the continued exposure of coordinated systemic sex trafficking by elites. While truthers can be demoralized by the slow rollout, The darkest path never entirely disappears from the Mind War, and when it returns, it does so with a vengeance. It can come as a mild surprise to Anons how normies can get swept up into the drama of the P. Diddy saga with a fervor that puts their engagement with most other alleged debauchery by elites to shame. But then Breitbart's "politics is downstream from culture" refrain remains one of the great truisms ever uttered in the American socio-political zeitgeist for a reason. As for what the P. Diddy and Nickelodeon deployments germinate that Epstein seeded, first, elite predators are coordinated and protected. Second, they've been hiding in plain sight in American culture and politics. Third, they aren't self-made. And finally, they are no longer safe. It's not about Diddy. It's not about Epstein. It's about who's behind them and why. Taken in stride, one of the most encouraging aspects of the current moment in the info war is that the enemy has reached the point where they can no longer conceal the reality of crimes against children, so they're well into the conflation phase, accusing others of their own crimes. The reason this is such an easy observation to make is largely owing to the Q-op, which prepped millions of minds for these future narrative moves, and Trump was engaged in narrative seeding even before that more directed and detailed op went hot. When you look back at the first Trump admin, and especially the lead up to it, Trump's rhetoric ran two parallel tracks. First, seeding of the revelations and ensuing justice to come years later. Two, bait for the very establishment he and patriots were hunting to hunt him. The first Trump admin was all about template and precedent setting, and now those chickens are finally coming home to roost in the collective mind, which is why I often say that game theory's a bitch if you're on the wrong side of it. In keeping with this refrain, one of my core theories is that the Epstein deployment, both his arrest and subsequent, quote, suicide, which became the most mimetic event of all time, doubled as the biggest red pill deposit of all time, with the ensuing years having seen a germination phase play out largely using the shark fin template in the War of Stories. This has laid the groundwork for the mass population awakening we were promised, and that I believe is already in full swing, very slowly and then all at once, with the trauma paralysis vector of the enemy's Hegelian dialectic being reverse engineered into a trauma catharsis paradigm, and with the former's fear being replaced by a necessary and temporary righteous anger that will see these people unable to walk down the street. Much as many of us argue that foundational theories such as John Harold's devolution can't be observed directly but gravitationally, the rollout of the darkest path recalls some of Chris Paul's lectures on what he refers to as the informational timeline. To wit, while my own speculation posits that the narrative seeding process is then followed by a germination phase that is based on metrics we are unaware of, I believe the pattern likely has to do with the actual versions of the fake numbers and metrics the deep state tosses out with frequency to assign realness to their fictions. Assuming there are actuals to go on, the timeline of the informational drip, drip, flood pattern the info war has taken on can't be accidental. And if you think this revisionist history, observe the thoughts I expressed 15 months ago when the Balenciaga saga took center stage in a mirror to the above refrain. Quote, remember that, even if you lose the will to expose the corruption inherent in any of the figures, factions, and systems we explore around these parts and elsewhere in this brilliant community of thinkers, writers, readers, and researchers, that it was never about the towers, the castles, and the fortresses of their domain. It was about the foundations and the bones that hold them up. It was about the children, and it continues to be. While this can be an understandably depressing topic, my appeal to you today is to see the emerging and far from finished Balenciaga saga as less of a shocking exposure and more an encouraging, even a divine sign that we are approaching a time in American and world history where these unspeakable dregs are not simply whispered of in the dark corners and derided in the open, but discussed in the cold light of a judging day, judged by us and for us, as the symbolism inherent in the warped, poisonous philosophy that underlies everything they are building, that buoys every narrative and policy, social movement, and military deployment they have visited upon us. The Epstein arrest remains one of the most all-encompassing narrative seeds ever administered to the collective mind, and stands as a sobering and unifying reminder that we must not lose the future in the present, the macro in the micro, or yes, the forest for the trees. As Gandalf says in the Fellowship of the Ring, even the very wise cannot see all ends, even if we guess at them and apply all of our individual and collective cognitive might and discernment to the attempt. Epstein was not a man, though he might have been a demon, or at least working in service to them. Epstein was and is a massive cultural touchstone unlike anything we have ever seen before. Not because of what he is accused of, and not because he was a name before becoming the name, but because of the crime, because of the money, because of the influence implicit in the two together, and because of the truth that underlies it all. End quote. Seeing this narrative disclosure pattern rendered corporeal in the war of stories in the form of converging headlines starts to make it look much more patterned than random. And if you don't think there's a narrative pattern on display that ghosts in the media machine may be influencing, you haven't been paying attention. To wit, some recent headlines. Jimmy Gardner, brother-in-law of Stacey Abrams, makes first appearance on human trafficking charge. Next, yet another leftist journalist arrested on child pornography charges. Third, ex-ABC senior producer who Rolling Stone covered for, indicted on child porn charges. Fourth, CNN producer sentenced to 19 years in prison for pedophilia. Fifth, senator accuses Biden admin of, quote, facilitating the largest child trafficking ring in human history. And there's plenty more where those came from, which is why I recently said the following, burning bright on Truth Social. Once upon a time, in the early days of the InfoWar, when Pizzagate was fresh in the socio-political ether, I would respond to questions such as, "You don't think it's all of them, do you?" with some overly complicated treatise on the nature of systems, leverage, blackmail, satanic belief, and narrative projection to say what I now say much more directly. Yeah, actually, I do think it's pretty much all of them. I put this particular refrain a little more colorfully on a recent episode of The Devolution.
Over the weekend, we also had a prominent journalist who was one of the main debunkers of the Pizzagate theories, the Pizzagate conspiracy theories, who was nabbed for child porn, which is, there used to be a meme sort of on 4chan of reset the clock. And this reset the clock meme was it was directly in reference to male feminists. So the idea was that every time a news article comes out in which a male feminist and a publicly avowed male feminist beat a woman, reset the clock. And the idea is that it's the projection idea, right? These people are what they project onto everybody else. So it's not shocking to most of us that, you know what, most of the guys who are debunking Pizzagate are effing pedophiles. Like, and it's not a wacky conspiracy theory to say that. It's true. And it's verifiable. It is an undeniable pattern. I don't think it's a coincidence either that kind of stuff is being seeded at the same time that Elon's going after Media Matters. It wasn't somebody in Media Matters, but it's sort of this idea of, okay, Elon is exposing the mechanisms through which information control has been accomplished by the establishment. But I think what some of this Pizzagate stuff starts to do is it starts to thread this subconscious thread into the collective mind of why. It's not just money for a lot of these people. For a lot of people, we're like, why do they're still lying, man? Are they still, even if they run out of money, even if they get bankrupted, why are they still hanging on this stuff? And it's because a lot of these people have a lot of incentives to keep real news and real exposures from getting out there.
And it's not just in the media realm where these exposures are taking place, but also in Hollywood, as a cultural pushback to systemic trafficking kicked off in earnest in the summer of 2023 when Sound of Freedom took the American culture war by storm, and in the midst of a temporary resuscitation of the US box office during the Barbenheimer craze, which I wrote about in Hegelian Hydra. The films boldly presented truths, using a reversal of Hollywood's Hegelian dialectic by dramatizing truth itself, are only rivaled by the chaotic, demonic din of the shrieking and shrinking hordes within the system attempting to quiet it, thereby amplifying its messaging. From Rolling Stone under Save the Children, Sound of Freedom is a superhero movie for dads with brainworms. The QAnon-tinged thriller about child trafficking is designed to appeal to the conscience of a conspiracy-addled boomer. While Rolling Stone started the self-immolative snowball rolling that kicked off this media crisis cascade, Bloomberg put the icing on the cake, giving us the best example yet of the common truth community refrain: sometimes they tell you who they are. Patriots are in control on Truth Social. Quote, ABC News wrote a hit piece on the movie, bringing awareness to child trafficking on the very same day it was announced. One of their former senior producers would plead guilty to transportation and possession of child porn. Starting to get why these news outlets hate Sound of Freedom? Which is especially delicious in light of the totally accidental counter-programming by Donald Trump and Agenda 47 that resurfaced at the same time. From real Donald Trump on Truth Social: stopping child trafficking, hashtag Agenda 47. More seeding, more germination. And if you think it's a coincidence that this exposure is happening when the media and entertainment machine are currently experiencing an existential crisis unlike anything they've ever seen before, you haven't been taking seriously the prospect that the interconnected nature that defines the deep state's system of systems is also its biggest vulnerability and the most effective vector of control for taking it down. Hollywood and the media industrial complex are committing seppuku in front of the world, as evidenced by the fact that over the course of much of 2023, the entertainment industrial complex kicked off a writers' strike and a directors' strike, which was soon followed by an actors' strike. They did this in the midst of the most contentious socio-political climate in decades, a stagflated economy and declining box office receipts and ratings for woke Marxist programming, which preceded the 2024 accelerating trend of mass media layoffs in virtually all sectors of the tech sphere, many of whom built their false followings in an echo-chambered anti-Trump environment artificially boosted by Sorosian funding and systemic regime control of virtually all public levers of information dissemination. So, to recap, we've got the following parallel deployments that seem to be afflicting the system of systems simultaneously. First, an Ouroboros pattern of destruction, as the useful idiots at the bottom of the communist totem pole begin chewing at the timbers of the very studios they sold their souls to. Second, the heads of said studios being put on blast in the public mind. Third, the consolidation of the entertainment world into the tech world. And fourth, both industries closing ranks around pedophiles. Who's really pulling the strings? Whose movie are we watching? A narrative crisis cascade is emerging for the enemy on these darkly hallowed grounds that is resulting in convergence within the collective mind between the political establishment circa 2016 and the anti-Q crowd. As for us, we're being prepped to be the frame and support, not for political corruption alone, but for the foundation that holds it all up, the blood-stained cement at the base of the temple. For the reconciliation with the existence and ignorance of evil. Each of the above storylines are battles within a larger war, and while I often frame that war as one between sovereignty and collectivism, I don't think it's too reductive or dramatic to frame it as one between good and evil. and however that offends the sensibilities of those who consider themselves too intellectual to reduce reality to its constituent parts and human beings to their respective roles, it is not through political scandal, election fraud, and even financial leverage we see this ultimate struggle best personified, though each contains its echoes, but in the darkest path and the foundation of the system of systems, which also represents the core why on both sides of the struggle. The children, the innocent, life, love, and the pursuit of happiness, rendered most starkly threatened in those who need it to be defended on their behalf, before the burden and gift of choice is a thing laid before them on the path to adulthood. As we can see, the path and attacks on trafficking and Overton's goalpost accelerated sharply in 2023, the rare case where both sides of the narrative are perfectly paradoxically congruent in that together the conspiracy explored along with the desperate lies used in an attempt to obfuscate it were simultaneously boosting the idea to new heights in the American zeitgeist by the day, while also revealing the very media industrial complex it tangentially and perhaps directly implicates. Sunlight doesn't just burn vampires, it reveals them as well through both the light of discovery and its very real, observable, corporeal effects upon the embodiment of evil, forming a perfect feedback loop of blinding revelation and retribution. Overall, the guardians of the pedophiles' arm of the system of systems is crumbling, devouring itself. Their symbols are collapsing, while their ability to obfuscate or weaken our own is rendered inert. But in the end, most in this community would agree that the seeding and germination phase must be followed up by a harvest of sorts, a harvest that just might look an awful lot like justice. And so, I'd like to focus in on the key vector of attack for the media industrial complex, where it relates to crusaders against child trafficking not being the message, or even solely the messengers in this case, but more a symbol the messengers have been associated with, and a series of symbols this community has been associated with. Which brings me to the chosen header image for this piece, which should be familiar to longtime Anons and newbie truthers alike, even if you weren't a comic book nerd like I was. Frank Castle, the Punisher, a symbol that needs little explanation, and one that is as righteously unifying to the one side as it is biblically terrifying to the other. Hence the attacks we've been seen spilling out into the culture war on this symbol, on this character, right alongside the Trump, MAGA, Q, and truth of it all. From Newsweek magazine, March 10th, 2021, Marvel's Punisher Problem. Headline. And here's a brief excerpt from that piece, which is one among many in recent years. Quote, Marvel has a popularity problem with one of its B-list characters, the Punisher, a.k.a. Frank Castle, a troubled ex-Marine turned vigilante who metes out lethal justice to the corrupt and criminal. The people I kill need killing. Right now, it's too popular with the wrong people. Among the MAGA hats, Don't Tread on Me flags, and Trump 2024 banners on display during the January 6th invasion of the Capitol were also logos and images belonging to various comic book characters. One of the most popular was the Punisher's signature white on black skull emblem, which cropped up on patches, shirts, and flags. Some were on officially licensed Marvel merchandise, some on copyright infringing knockoffs, while the symbol has long been popular with people eager, either seriously or in jest, to project a badass image. Its public appropriation by a pro-Trump mob touched a nerve. End quote. Just as wokeness isn't an ideology, neither is evil itself. It's a belief in no belief. It's the destruction of symbols rather than building of them. And why, pray tell, do you think they might want to go after this one? Attacks on our symbols betray a fundamental truth that nests at the heart of both human psychology and the info war, meant to alternatively wield it against its own self-interests and free it, depending on which side you're talking about, and that is the inherent, mimetic, and unifying power of those symbols. And the other side has long known this, hence their own predilection for symbols, which we've been told will be their downfall. From more conspiratorial fare, including the Eye of Horus, white rabbits, and the devil's horns, to the more provable, including FBI symbols, pizza and pasta, and on to the surface mapping level, such as Black Lives Matter flags and Ukraine color coding symbols, have become signs distinguishing both establishment from sovereigns, but also sleepers from those who have defected. But we all know this. We know our enemies by the symbols they flaunt, like Nazi Germany, but now I understand and believe that this statement of inherent truth goes both ways. Symbolism won't just be their downfall because it helps us recognize and tie them together, but also because our symbols bind us together and unify us, not in common leverage and secrecy and sin, but in common cause, common belief, and common values. In direction. On a purely symbolic level, Disney is perhaps most symbolic itself of the entertainment industrial complex, which is ironic, considering that it got that way largely by taking over and subverting symbolism itself. From the classic animated films, steeped in the strange and disturbing, to the mythic source material and fables they were pulled from, to the modern era of bulk grabbing of important and influential American intellectual property, including Star Wars, Pixar, and Marvel, to name a few. Moves that were originally cheered by audiences are now being lamented. This can be witnessed most directly in the monetized and mimetic culture war trend on YouTube, which largely kicked off with the public execution of Luke Skywalker in 2017 in The Last Jedi. While Star Wars superfans were angry because of the intentional and brazen character symbol assassination they were subjected to, mainstream audiences largely expressed apathy. But that perspective is also short-sighted. Luke is a symbol, and the establishment's intentional destruction of him was and is proof of their ultimate designs, following a trend of destruction and subversion of anything male, strong, and modest. In case you hadn't noticed, we live in an accelerated era in which virtues have been intentionally subverted and flipped, praising selfish end goals rather than self-sacrifice, nihilism over altruism, hedonism over righteousness. Contrast this with films from 20 years ago, where Viggo Mortensen's Aragorn is perhaps the most enduring modern symbol of the ideal man in genre fiction, portrayed without subversion in a performance and film series that will easily go down as one of the most beloved in Western culture. Thus, the reason I'm obsessed with stories is the same reason they are. Stories run the world because stories run the human psyche, and stories are only as good, powerful, and grabbing as the characters that inhabit them, which brings us into the realm of the sometimes real. Trump is a symbol, just as Biden is, just as Putin, Xi, and all the other shadows on the wall we're watching fight for their part in the narrative that will decide who gets to write the truth are all witting and unwittingly cast, assigned as ciphers, with the war of stories deciding how they imprint onto the collective mind. The convergence of these ciphers doesn't always serve their ends, but ours, as witnessed by Trump, Putin, and Xi, being seen as nationalist, populist leaders by both sides of the war of stories, providing directional hints as to who is winning the Psy war. This also explains the positive net effects of attacks on these men to their respective supporters, such as Trump's witch hunt, and yes, I did say Trump's, and the ongoing weaponization of government storyline being advanced in the U.S. Similarly, Biden and his handlers are currently seen as representative of the establishment uniparty by both sides. Elsewhere, layered both above and below the socio-political realm, infecting and informing each, Q is a symbol and will likely be an enduring one. Just as we Anons are a symbolic collective. The Punisher is a symbol and a character, and now their storytellers are at war with the machine that has prompted this desecration of our favored cultural ciphers, creating an Ouroboros pattern in which the defenders of the false reality with themselves be rendered unreal as the very symbols they seek to subvert begin to win the subconscious call to cognitive arms that is the awakening. Ultimately, we assign meaning to symbols, just as we assign meaning to ourselves as long as we reject enemy framing. Why is the Punisher a symbol of our movement then? It's not about violence. It's not even about vengeance. It's about something deeper and more primal. It's about something biblical and inherent. What does the symbol and character represent to us? A mindset, a direction, unerringly forward. What does it represent to them? Simply that we see them for who they are and what they are now. And there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. Why? Because first subconsciously and eventually very painfully, consciously, crimes against children will unite humanity. In We Are Q, I argued that as keepers and custodians, even guardians of truth, we don't need to look for Q's return, nor do we have to revisit the wisdom in the original drops, even if sometimes going backward is the best way to recharge en route to a new forward push. The Punisher is a mindset. MAGA is a mindset. Q is a mindset. Inherent in the earnest engagement with the Q op is a central truth. When you argue from the enemy's framing from the outset of a psychological engagement, you've already lost, and that's not something we can abide in a mind war. Thus, how you learned is irrelevant in the face of what you learned. If you have difficulty understanding this in various socio-political contexts, try this one on for size. Stop defending the source of your knowledge that worldwide globalist elites are either directly involved in or benefit from crimes against children. Stop defending yourself from satanic pedophiles and those who defend them. I believe Trump's role was largely as a shot across the bow to them and a signal flare to us. And where it concerns the darkest path, he's never been too shy about it, even if he's been veiled. I believe Q's role was to prompt the largest awakening acceleration in the history of the modern age. And as I said, I believe our role, should we choose to embrace it, is to act as the frame and support for the slow blinking sleepers as they take their first steps out into a light so blinding it will momentarily trick them into thinking they've fallen into a deeper darkness. On my personal path to awakening, I used to think of the Great Awakening refrain as cute and catchy and metaphorical. Now I see it as symbolic, which isn't anything close to the same thing. While Frank Castle's Punisher prefers to arrange the meeting with evil and its antithesis in a more literal manner than we would dare advocate in these pages, we can arrange the meeting between our fellow brothers and sisters and the truth, and to let that oldest light that is still the brightest light spark whatever it will and carry the torch from there. We're in an era of beginnings, but beginnings come on the back of endings. We're entering a new era of symbols. Create them, support them, be them. To build symbols, you have to believe in something. So what do you believe in? In the end, the logical endpoint of Overton's goalpost is narrative convergence with the truth. Eventually, the enemy is so embattled, so hemmed in, that they have no choice but to describe accurately their opposition. What is the ultimate truth all their lies have sought to cover up then? The same one that brought many of us into the InfoWar dance in the first place and that prompted the Great Awakening. When the mainstream media begins to describe Trumpism accurately the Q-op and Anons as peaceful crusaders against elites who engage in crimes against children and who don the symbols and ciphers of stories that forward the same foundational argument. Don't hesitate with your plea, guilty as charged. How do we deal with such evil then? Biblically, not just the sins, but the solutions. Headline: Trump pledges death penalty for human traffickers. Here's what else he's promising if elected in 2024. Isn't it something that the highest court in the land was completely reformed under Trump? We know why, and so do, I suspect, they. The time is quickly approaching when all those who've either passively or intentionally ignored the ubiquity of crimes against children among the would-be elites who have and would lord over us are going to be confronted with a reckoning. Since the advent of the Q-op and even stretching back further to Donald Trump's initial ride down the golden escalator, open info war was declared on the establishment, the same establishment that is currently spending the last of its financial, legal, and psychological capital in a desperate bid to destroy the leader of the America First movement. The establishment is made up of Democrats, of course, a party that will ostensibly cease to exist following the 2024 election cycle, but conservatives have been given a crash course on the more subversive, more insidious form of evil represented by the Republican Party, the Con Inc. Brigade, and the wolves in sheep's clothing represented by fake MAGA candidates who declared war on the rest of the movement simply by putting their names on the ballot in the first place. While the establishment is bound together through the shared sins of money laundering, often using foreign funds that run through Ukraine and other distressed sovereign states with limited oversight, influence peddling, and open corruption, it is the darkest path in the info war, and the one many Anons first began charting in 2017, that forms the bedrock and the foundation of the very system they exist to serve and protect. From the financial and the clandestine, to the political and to the cultural, the central pillars of the deep state's system of systems are cemented with the blood of children, with its scions and representatives either active participants in what Andrew Breitbart referred to as unspeakable dregs, or witting agents of obfuscation on behalf of those who do. From the Obama administration to the Clinton Foundation, the DNC to the RNC, Con Inc. to fake MAGA, the central bankers to the European Union, they're all bound together by the participation in, funding of, or defense of directed evil against innocence. And until you face up to that fact, the corrupt mosaic that is the deep state is going to be lost on you, and you'll be stuck in a confused kaleidoscope of seemingly formless, meaningless chaos. Evil isn't random. Evil isn't natural. Evil is man-made and managed. And the symbol of its heart in the war of stories, that is the war for the collective mind, is represented by a little island in the Caribbean, and the name attached to it, and all the names that will spin out from that. We're going to bring the whole diseased, corrupt temple down on their collectivist heads, very slowly, and then all at once. The plan was always real, because the evil it was meant to address was always real. So then, what woke me up? What brought me to the light? The dark. And that is where I plan to stay until our many tasks are done. Don't run from the dark, then. Don't hide in it. Burn it away. Until next time, stay positive, stay based, and most importantly, stay bright. And that's our show for today, guys. Burning bright. I gotta thank you for living by your motto that brevity is the soul of wit. Wonderfully brief. Lovely piece. Both The Cade Awakening and Burning Bright. Thank you so much. Don't forget to go to epicminerals.net. Let me show you a little something or other about some chemtrails.
He said something that really hit home about this phenomena of chemtrails.
Manganese
will make you kill your mama? How much manganese are you spraying in my neighborhood at night while I'm asleep?
Military and some commercial jets have been fitted with huge barrels of at least 49 different kinds of documented chemical poisons. Barium is toxic to all mammals. Aluminum is known to diminish kidney function and destroy brain cells and cognitive function. A problem, a serious problem.
Patent number 5003186 describes cooling the Earth with metal oxides sprayed into the stratosphere.
And I thought, well, geez, this is what I do for a living. I was finding tons and tons of large quantities of aluminum, barium, strontium in the forms of oxides and sulfates. Instead of protecting the people, we are poisoning the people.
Detox from and prevent heavy metal poisoning at epicminerals.net. There's 5 sprays in your mouth in the morning, guys, and then, of course, 5 sprays before you go to bed. You will not regret that. All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you tomorrow.
I will be the greatest president that God ever created.
So labor is 39 cents a jar.